Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the presentation on the Sowams Indians. I want to introduce the presenter for today. His name is David Weed. David, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, the presentation, and then if you will all please stay and join us for refreshments afterwards. Okay? Welcome, David.
Thanks, Betty, and thank to every one of you who took time out of your day to come over here and learn a little bit about what happened over 350 years ago here. I'm Dave Weed. I'm not a historian by trade. I was a psychologist for 30 years over in Fall River. When I retired, though, 5 years ago, I noticed some activity behind my house, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. But I'm sure there are things that you know. I already talked to one woman here about what may already be over at the beach, so I've got to look into that. So you may know some things, and gentleman here brought in an axe head, okay? So I'm sure within this group there are things that you know that I have no idea about. Okay? So, as I said, I live on Burrs Hill Park on the edge. I'm back up in the trees there. I'm on Bridge Street, but when I get up every morning, I look out my bedroom window, I see Burrs Hill Park. Okay, I assume, how many people are not from Warren? Okay, a few. Not original. Well, I'll explain where Burrs Hill Park is. Everybody else will know where it is. But if you go to the town beach, right across the street is a large park. That's the park that you will see there. And that park has been there since 1924. But there have been some other things there prior to that time. And when I retired 5 years ago, I woke up one morning and found that there was an excavator over there, and they were digging a hole. And I thought, what is going on? You'll find out. The mystery begins. Well, does anybody remember the beach before 1924? Okay? No, you never know. Right. Fortunately, Julie Blunt found this photo, which is, this is where you're on top of a sand hill here, and that's the parking lot today, okay? So you're looking north. This is the beach right there, okay? And then Blount Boats is right along here. We have no idea whether that house ever got moved. A lot of them got moved around. They were summer cottages, one thing or another. But from that photo, we know that that park was not level, okay, originally. In fact, it was full of hills. This is not a photograph, but I put together some pictures. So this is approximately what Burrs Hills, plural, would have been like back before 1924, because it was nothing but sand dunes with trees on it. I know, does anybody know Louise Solomon? She lives across the street from there, right? And she said her father used to play in trees across the street from her in what is now the parking lot, okay? So we know it looked considerably different. The other thing we know about that space is that they put the railroad through. Anybody here around in 1854? Never know. That railroad went right through along the edge of the park there, dug out a lot of the sand, and they used the sand and gravel from these dunes here to level a lot of the railroad, particularly further south. If you go down toward Beach Street and in that direction where the bike path is now. So we know a good deal about these mounds. Lots of people say, oh, those are Indian burial mounds. And I say, no, these were the original sand mounds that were there from the beginning. The Indians or the Pokanoket people came to this location and buried their people there because anybody ever tried to dig a 6-foot deep hole somewhere around here?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. What's it like?
Rocks.
Rocks, roots,
Roots, yeah.
everything. You can't get more than 4 or 5 inches down, all right? Well, they only had clamshell hose, so they were looking for a place that they could dig at least 3 or 4 feet down to lay a body to rest, and this seemed like the ideal place. Also, what's the view you get from Burrs Hill when you stand up on one of these mounds? What do you look across the water, and what do you see?
Everything.
Warwick.
What's that?
Warwick.
Warwick, right. And the Pokanokets weren't in Warwick. Who was in Warwick? The Narragansetts. Did the Pokanokets and the Narragansetts get along?
No.
No. Okay. So you didn't want to bury your dead overlooking your enemy. But if you notice, if you're standing on the beach here and you look across, you see Barrington. You don't see Warwick. Warwick's around on the other side. So in order for people's spirits to go toward the setting sun, they would be buried here along with items that were of personal use or to them while they were alive. So it would include some shells and things of that sort, but it also included a lot of English or Dutch items. So there were burials there over the 1500s that went on, we think, for at least a century. It's hard to tell. We couldn't find it. The archaeologists couldn't find anything prior to that time. So at least from about maybe 15, 20 or so forward, they were burying people there. And it was, like I said, it's an ideal place for a burial site. Easy to access, the right view, and above the water line. We think, we're all concerned about rising tides and rising water. Well, the people who lived here for 10,000 years, they knew about rising water, okay? And they had a long memory passed down through stories. So they didn't want to bury anybody next to the water. They wanted them up on a hill. So if you go there today, has anybody gone over there to look at the marker? Right across from the town beach, there's a historic marker. Tony's seen it. I put that there a couple of years ago, and that tells the whole history of Burrs Hill and how in 1913, the town librarian, Charles Carr, was an amateur archaeologist, and he decided that he was going to dig up these burials because people in town were digging and looting them, taking things home, and he didn't like that. So he exhumed 42 grave sites there, and all the items, over 600 items, then went to a variety of museums. I'll explain a little bit more as we go on. So that's Burrs Hill, right? I got first involved in this before I retired, back probably 15 years ago, when I discovered the Hugh Call Well. How many people have seen the Hugh Call Well? Okay. There used to be a bronze plaque on the stone there, but somebody pried it off, I have no idea when, probably in the 60s or 70s, in order to sell the metal, I'm sure. And so there was no marker there. Well, fortunately, there was a black and white photo of the marker, so we knew exactly what it looked like. And we had a company that makes these markers in plastic, not bronze. Okay? So that's what you see. It is still there. It's been pried off twice. They toss it into the pond there. Fortunately, it floats. It's kind of like a foam plastic kind of stuff. And it's a little beaten up, but we were able to get it now re-glued onto the rock. So far, nobody's taken it off. But that was my first inkling of what was going on in this town, because Hugh Cole was the child of people who came over on the Mayflower and lived in Plymouth. In fact, Cole lived in Plymouth for a number of years, and it wasn't until he was an adult man that he purchased some land over here from Usamiquan, the Massasoit, and was able to establish a farm, not in this location, but further east on the Coles River. Anybody seen Riverby? It's a house that's still there. It wasn't from the 1600s, but it's been built over the house that was burned during the King Philip War. So you have that little piece of history of a man who came the first settler in what is today Warren, Hugh Cole, and his whole history. He also fought in the King Philip War. But we, here, for those of you in the back, I'll read the inscription. He was a sergeant in King Philip's War, 1675, an esteemed friend of King Philip, from whom he purchased his claim in 1669. This tablet, erected by his descendants in 1917, beside the well, that's covered over now, that he excavated in 1677 upon his home farm, which was always remained in possession of his family until given by Miss Abby Cole to the town of Warren, Rhode Island. Anybody a relative of Abby Cole? I'm looking.
Do you know what year that was, that it was handed over to the town?
1917. Does that ring a bell? Okay. Yeah, it's getting tough to find people who are close to 100, and they had to be even older to be able to remember anything. But in any case, we have that history. I went to a lecture by this woman, Ellen Jader, who was living in Barrington. And she had been looking into this whole area here and said, you know, we ought to create a national heritage area. Anybody ever been to the Blackstone Valley Heritage Area?
Yes.
Okay, good. Not many people go there. It's a little hard to find, and you have to be looking for it. But that's one. That was the second of what is now 66 heritage areas, national heritage areas across the country. A heritage area is just a location where lots of history took place, but that nobody knows about. And what you do is create this area, get Congress to approve it and the National Park Service, and you bring it alive. You tell people what went on there. My favorite is the Essex National Heritage Area north of Boston in Essex County. Actually goes into a little of New Hampshire. And if anybody been to Ipswich with the old houses there, it's a fabulous place. You gotta go. If you're into the 17th century, it's like walking into the 17th century. Unbelievable. So, Helen convinced me that we should work on creating a heritage area here to tell the history here. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. Here we are in southern Massachusetts and Rhode Island. You see Cape Cod here, and then this map here, which is the map of the territory that Usamiquan led. He was in charge of over 60 tribes, sub-tribes, and clans, all the way almost up to Boston, to the Charles River, and all the way down here, including Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, but not the Cape. The Cape wasn't in this territory. The Nauset's were out there. So he ruled this whole area, and I say ruled, you know, it's not like an autocratic king. He ruled by persuasion, okay? He had to get people to agree to things so that they would go along with him, which meant that he had to be a very good diplomat because not everybody agreed with everything that he had in mind. Okay? Here's the map of his territory. This is Sowams Bay on this map, but it's the Seekonk River. Okay? This is Bristol. Does that help you get oriented?
Yeah.
Okay? And then it goes all the way over to the Taunton River. Okay? So this whole area here was Pokanoket land, and they called it Sowams. You've heard of Sowams Elementary School, Sowams Road. Not a lot of Sowams. We need more Sowams around here. How about Sowams cider? Anybody tried some of that? Okay, we have a cider works in town now, and he changed the name to Sowams. So this was his territory. Typically, what you hear is Wampanoag, okay? And today, you'll find most people referring to all of this territory as Wampanoag territory, right? However, I did some research and found that that wasn't a name that anybody heard at the time of the Massasoit. Before Europeans arrived, people lived in this area for about 10,000 years. Why didn't people live here before 10,000 years?
Glaciers.
Glaciers, right? Yeah, too cold. Mile-high thick ice, okay? All the way off the coast even, okay? There was no way a human being could ever survive here, all right? So we know for sure that no one was here before the glaciers started receding about 12,000 years ago. It took a little while for them to melt, but as they melted, as animals moved into the area, caribou and others, and hunters would follow into the area, okay, and eventually people populated the area, usually in small bands, not large villages. They were hunter-gatherers, okay, and they weren't raising crops. They didn't start raising corn until about 1,000 years ago. So it's a relatively recent kind of thing. And once you raise your food, what happens? Do you stay in one place or move around?
Civilization develops.
You stay
Pardon
in
me?
one place.
Civilization develops.
Civilization, the way we think of it, not that people weren't civilized before, it's just they had to move around to get their food. But when you start growing crops, you got to stay there, okay? And
Division of labor.
right, yeah, particularly between men and women. Women did all the work, and no.
Yes.
Some things never change, right? The men did the hunting and important things.
Yeah, once a week.
Yeah, right. So you had cornfields around here, okay, and they would clear the land. What's the easiest way to take a tree down if you don't have steel axes?
Fire.
Fire, right? Burn it, okay? And that's what they would do. They would, leave the stumps in the ground. It didn't really matter. And then you plant your corn in hills, okay, around the stumps, okay? You got plenty of sunlight, and it worked very well. In fact, they were able to grow enough food that they didn't have to move. They moved because they were running out of firewood, or maybe the fishing was a little better over there. But relatively speaking, they stayed in a much more stable situation.
They usually had 3 areas that they would go throughout the year.
Sure, right, yeah. And you do these seasonal moves, right? And over time, you think about 10,000 years, that's a lot of moving. Okay, people got to know the area very well. Okay. So here they are, raising corn. Settlements were getting larger, and these people from Europe were showing up in these large floating islands, with big clouds. Oh, I guess those are sails. And they found that these folks weren't interested in staying. They just wanted to trade, because what did Europeans have that the people who were living here didn't have?
Guns.
Guns, one, yeah. What else?
Metal.
Cloth.
Metal, okay,
Metal
steel. Okay.
Cloth.
Woven cloth, right, as opposed to furs and things of that sort. And those were very useful, and the native people here, were very eager to try something new if it improved their life, okay? They weren't particularly interested in things that didn't improve their life, as anyone would. So this trading went on, who was the first visitor to this area from Europe?
Verrazano?
Verrazano, 1524. We know he was probably in Newport, though he may have been as far up as Bristol. It's a little hard to tell from his navigation. He spent 2 weeks here, got to know the people here, thought they were fabulous. They were healthy, strong, tall, okay, not full of disease. What were the guys on the ship like? Not in good shape, okay? And if they survived scurvy, they were disease-ridden and one thing or another. So here he's looking at his crew, doesn't look so good, and looking at these strong, healthy, vibrant people who are always in a good mood, because they have what they needed, right? So Verrazano writes this report. Eventually, who else came here after that? And actually, we're missing one other possible visitor a lot earlier.
Leif Erikson?
Leif Erikson, right. Yeah, it's a little hard to tell by the writing, the sagas, but it is conceivable because we know that they were in Nova Scotia. We know they got that far. And that they may have come down. And there's one story that kind of sounds like they were camped at Hop, H-O-P, which became Hope, Mount Hope, on the Bristol Peninsula. They stayed over a winter. So they weren't permanent residents, but quite likely that they did in fact come here. So here we have all these traders coming by, but not staying, which was fine with the native people here. They liked what they brought, but they didn't like something else they brought. Probably a French fishing vessel in 1616 showed up with something that no one understood at the time, except for the fact that the Europeans were fine, but the native people began dying in droves. Okay? Pardon me? Well, that was one theory, but that does not appear to be the case. We don't know for sure. Some people have said leprosporosis. There are other infectious diseases. All we have to go on are the descriptions. We don't have any DNA or any other evidence of that. So it's speculative at this point. What we do know is that they died very quickly, sometimes within hours. And because the native way was when somebody's suffering, the family gathers together around them. Well, that's great for an infectious disease, so it spread very quickly. And by the time the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, there was no one left in the Plymouth village. No one. Okay? It was just bones. People died so fast that there was nobody there left to bury the dead. So you're seeing skeletons on the ground. And of course, the English come in and look around and see this cleared land in the place that a village obviously stood, but there's no people there. What do they think? Let's move in. God has cleared the way for us. Isn't that nice? Well, they were desperate too. They were sick and not doing well, so any port in a storm was going to help. So here they arrive, and meanwhile, over 90% of the native population along the Atlantic coast had died just a few years before. So, essentially, you find these empty villages. Meanwhile, the Massasoit Usamiquan, where is he? Is he in Plymouth? No. Not probably not Mount Hope, probably downtown Warren. Okay, yeah, Mount Hope was occupied more by Philip, his son, a little later. So at the time that the Pilgrims arrived, here's the Massasoit living in what we would call Warren. How many know the Massasoit Spring on Baker Street? Yeah, okay. That's one possible location. We have no firm evidence. There was a spring there. There were probably lots of springs around here. But if you find a spring close to salt water, chances are that somebody lived there. Okay, just makes sense. So, Pilgrims arrive. Nobody's around to bother them. And then Usamiquan. This is Usamiquan as a younger man This is the statue down in Plymouth of him as an older man. He was in his 40s in 1620. And he was very cautious. He did not want to go to Plymouth for fear that this disease could somehow be unleashed on them. So he held back. He had already lost enormous numbers of people in his tribeship, and he couldn't withstand more. But by March 22nd, what's March 22nd every year?
Spring.
Not quite.
Spring
Yeah.
comes.
That's a little earlier, the 15th, yeah. What else? We're getting a time change on Sunday, right?
Spring comes.
Okay, well, that's because of the vernal equinox. Okay, that's when there's 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness. Okay, so after the 22nd, the days will start getting longer and the darkness will be shorter. All right, that's been happening for, millions, billions of years. Nothing new about that, but it was a point of ceremonial interest to the native population. They spent much more time than we do. Anybody go out and look at the stars every night? You try. Not easy, is it? No.
I need one of those.
But if all this electric light that we put up wasn't here, you'd walk out and you'd see the Milky Way every night, and unless there were clouds. But they paid close attention, often stayed up many nights and told stories about, the figures that they saw in the sky and things of that sort. So they're very much in tune with the celestial events. So March 22nd was an auspicious time, and they felt ceremonially it was the right time to come and talk with the pilgrims. You don't speak English, what do?
Sign gestures.
Well, you can try that, or you can find somebody who does. Anybody remember Squanto?
Squanto, yeah.
Okay, to Swanum. How did he learn English?
How many what?
He got captured by William Hunt, I believe it is his first name, about 4 or 5 years before the Pilgrims arrived. Got taken to Spain along with 21 other native men. Eventually escaped, went to England, and spent 2 or 3 years there as a servant and learned English. He then found somebody who wanted to come over here, which there was a lot of interest in coming here, but they wanted to take somebody with them who could talk to the native population. So Squanto got a ride back, okay, and then walks into his village, what was called Patuxent. Plymouth is the English name, but the native name was Patuxent. Walks in there, finds everyone he knew gone. Can you imagine that? What if you went away on vacation and came back to Warren and everybody was dead? I mean, just the enormity of that, and the fact that they lost their history from their elders, they lost their warriors. I mean, they were in very difficult situation. Okay, we get concerned, rightfully so, when we lose 1 million people out of 300 million people in this country to COVID. They lost 90% of their population. It would be like losing 300 million people here. We just can't imagine that. That's what the Massasoit was dealing with. And he had to do something to protect his tribe. The English had something that he was interested in. You mentioned it earlier.
Guns.
Guns, right. Because the Narragansetts were breathing down his neck from the other side of the bay. They wanted to move into this area, and he didn't have enough men to defend himself. They'd already made some skirmishes into the area. But he figured if he would make a treaty with the English, and the English would come to his defense using those guns, he could keep them away. And that's exactly what happened. So the treaty was between the Massasoit and Governor Carver. It's well described by Ed Winslow, who we hear a lot about Ed Winslow because he published books. He printed his first book in 1624, okay, 3 years earlier. He was a printer in England, so he knew all about publishing. And he was able to write these books and get them into print in England early on in order to convince more English people to come over here. And his first book was called Good News from New England, meaning, this is a great place to live, come on over. Okay. So with this treaty in place, the English knew that Usamiquan and the Pokanokets would not be a threat to them. In fact, they would come to their defense, which they did shortly after the treaty was signed. And that guaranteed the peace between these two groups for over 40 years. If that hadn't happened, if Usamiquan said, we don't want any English around, they wouldn't have had any trouble with these 50 sickly people, getting them back on the boat and back to England, forget it. And if Canonicus had come over with the Narragansetts, he would have done the same thing. So if it weren't for this treaty, a treaty that's celebrated on the back of the Sacagawea dollar coin. Anybody have one of those? Yeah, nobody uses dollar coins, yeah. Yeah, if you're a coin collector, you'd have one. But if you look on the back, this is what's called the Wampanoag Treaty. I'll explain, there's no Wampanoag then, but the Pokanoket Treaty. And it guaranteed the survival and remained in effect for 50 years, which meant that the English could grow and expand, have more children. What do you do when you have more children? You break up your land and give them part of it?
No, you take more land.
You take more land, right. You want to keep your land, so you have to get more land. How do you get land back then?
Take it from
You
somebody
take it.
else.
You take it from, yeah, who had the land?
Steal it.
The Indians.
Yeah, the Pokanoket people, did they own land?
No.
No.
They didn't believe in that.
That's right.
That's
Ownership.
not 100% true.
Well, there are some changes. Their attitude changed over time. But you're right that their worldview has and still is that the land belongs to God.
Right.
We just use it and we're responsible for taking care of it. Okay? That attitude still remains today. Think that's good advice? Yeah. We're not doing such a great job as Europeans taking care of what we've got here.
Yeah, believe politicians.
But they did portion it out for themselves.
Sure.
They have belonged to God and they were there as,
You had all kinds of agreements over the use for hunting and fishing and traveling and things of that sort. And those would change from time to time.
Yeah.
But you're right, they had agreements with one another in terms of how the land was used and who had ascendancy in that. So when the English wanted land, what did they do? How do you get your land to expand the easy way? Do you do it, or do you let your farm animals do it? Sure, let your cows and your pigs wander off. Oh, they went into a native cornfield and destroyed it. Well, that's too bad. They weren't there taking care of it. They should have put a fence around it. Oh, now they don't want to be there anymore. Okay, my son and my daughter and a couple more kids can move into that area. It didn't take long. They used their animals as a way of expanding their territory. Yes, there were deeds, and there are many of them that were recorded. But again, the understanding with the deed is you have the use of this land, but we're still going to come in and fish and hunt there. Okay? So as you can imagine, there were numerous conflicts, and it got worse and worse and worse. And then what happened?
King Philip's War.
Yeah, King Philip's. Let's go back. This is Ed Winslow. That's the spring if you haven't been over there. Ed came down in 1621, right after the treaty, and had his first meeting in Warren. Then he came back in 2 years later in 1623, and the anniversary of that 400-year anniversary is going on this month. We don't know the exact date that he came back, but if you get that little handout about what we're going to be doing at Roger Williams University on the 22nd at 5 o'clock, just go to the library, it's free. We've got Richard Pickering from the Plymouth Plantation is coming down, and Don Brown Jr., the tribal historian for the Poconokeets. Two of them are going to give about an hour's worth of talk. So we might possibly, we might be lucky. Mr. Pickering is trying to get a copy of the Good News from New England, this book here that was published in 1624. The Boston Public Library has one of 5 copies, and he's going to see if he can get one of those copies. The copy he's interested in was underlined by Governor Thomas Prince at the time, and then it came into the possession of John Adams. He has his signature in the book. So it's a pretty cool book, and if you're interested in old things like that, come to the library, and hopefully we'll have it in under glass case, and you can take a look at it. So we have our 2 visits by Winslow. I often wondered, what did this place look like then? When I first started this, I thought, oh, this is 400 years ago. They must have had forests with huge trees, and dense forests here. This is cleared land. In fact, Poconoket means land of the clearing. And when Miles Standish came to visit here, he was astounded at the amount of open land. Why would an Englishman be interested in open land?
Farming.
Farming, right. Raising crops and raising your animals, okay? It's a lot of work to clear a forest, okay? So having all this stuff already cleared. So I just took a Google map and erased some of the trees here. But, and there was a trading post, we think, over on the Kickamuit in 1632. There's no firm evidence of that, but then there's scattered settlements around here, and lots of territory that the English would like to purchase, and in 1653 they did. Here's Miles calling Sowams. Sowams is from Bristol to Providence, okay, this whole area here. The Garden of the Patent. A patent is what you get from the king in order to own land, okay? But it was also the flower of the garden, and notice how he spells flower. They didn't. Spelling was a little variable then. But he became a landowner but never lived here. So he owned land that's in Warren today. And we don't know that, do we? No. Miles Standish. Another visitor came trucking down. This is our friend Roger Williams, all right? Roger wanted to get out of England too, so there was a great migration. Over 1,000 people left England in 1630, came over in 10, 11 ships, and Roger didn't get on that first wave, but got the next wave, got on board, and came over here. And why did he want to come over here?
Freedom of religion.
Freedom of religion. Oh, good. Our 3rd grade classes worked. If you don't know anything else, freedom of religion, okay? And I mean, basically, he was a rabble-rouser, and people really had a hard time hearing what he had to say. He had a whole different take on Christianity, and as he spoke more and more about it, they became more and more uncomfortable. So they said to Roger, who first came to Plymouth and got to know the Massasoit while he was there. Roger was very good at languages. His father was a cloth merchant, and he would send him down to the docks in London to make deals for cloth purchases by talking to the crew, not the captain, because he could learn languages like people from India and other places and talk with them and arrange the best deal, okay? So he was very good. He comes here, he has to learn Algonquin. He's very good at languages. He's published a whole book, Key to the Languages of America, okay? It's all translation of native expressions and sentences. So he had that ability. They kick him out of Plymouth, he goes back up to Salem. And then people in Boston get wind of him and his radical ideas, okay, that maybe the state and the church should be two separate things. They didn't like that idea, okay? So in January of 1636, they sent troops up to his house, take him and put him on a ship and send him back to England. He got wind of it and left in the night. And in one of the worst winters in January 1636, he walked 60 miles. Where did he go? Right here to Warren. Okay, he came to meet his friend the Massasoit. He may have been picked up by some of Massasoit's men as well. I'm sure he was not in very good shape, and he ends up being taken care of by the Massasoit and one of his wives, Margaret, so-called, at what's called Margaret's Cave, for 14 weeks. It took him to recover. He probably had triple pneumonia by the time he got here. Anybody know where Margaret's Cave is? Never heard of it. Well, you're off the hook because it's not actually in Warren. It's actually in Swansea, just over the north
You know where that is.
burial site. Have you been there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a kid, we played in it.
There you go, I'm sure. Yeah. And Devil's Rock and a lot of other places, right?
Spent our childhood over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Well, the Roger Williams Family Association
Can't
now
tell
has
a
a
lot
marker
of
there. And it's not, as you know, it's not really a cave. It's
No,
just,
not really.
yeah, you'd have to put some logs up against and make a lean-to, but you could build a fire in there. It makes perfect sense that somebody could have survived a winter there, but we're thinking Massasoit isn't going to send Roger out into the woods by himself. That's a native settlement. That was their winter encampment there, okay? So we get a bigger picture in terms of what was going on there. And if you're interested, let me know afterwards. I'll get your name and email address. I do walks there. It's on private property. So we do guided walks there with Keith Morton, who lives right nearby there. And let me know, and I'll put you on the list. And I know I have one walk scheduled in June. I might do one before then, but let me know. It takes about an hour and a half. You can get to go back to your...
We never had to worry about it. We used to.
Yeah, I know. The people still do. Charlie McCoy, who owns the land, is very much aware that people find their way there.
Yeah, we
So,
camped out there a lot of times.
yeah.
Shoot our guns there.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of stuff that goes on back there. So, Roger leaves Margaret's Cave, and Osamequin sends them up to Omega Pond. You know where that is in East Providence? It was on the Seekonk River. It used to be part of the Seekonk River. They filled it in, so now a big freshwater lake looks like that. And there's the spring that marks where he set up his first settlement is there, with a marker explaining that this is the site of the first settlement in 1636 by Roger Williams, et cetera, et cetera. Not very well done. We're trying to get the city of East Providence to put a marker there. It's on Roger Williams Avenue. It's not hard to find it. And there's one house just down the street that's from 1690, and the Philip Walker house, it's not far away also. We used to think it was before 1700, it's probably 1728 or so. So there's some older houses there. You know, this is the house that has been in 2 states and 3 towns and not having moved.
Yeah.
Because it was originally Rehoboth, then it got split with Seekonk, and then Seekonk got split with East Providence. Okay, so you get 3 different towns, and then the state line changed in 1747. So what was Massachusetts became Rhode Island.
And then they took some back.
There was an attempt to, but yeah, they were gonna do a trade, but it didn't go well for them. We got it. Yeah. And if you want to know more about Roger, anybody been to the Roger Williams Memorial? I know it's a national park, you know, on North Main Street in Providence. I was just there yesterday. You get off South Main Street, just keep going.
Exactly.
And then eventually you'll see this nice park along your left-hand side. And at the end of that park, there's the Roger Williams Visitor Center. It's very small, it's a historic house. But they'll show you a 10-minute movie and one thing or another, you can ask questions. It's not, I wouldn't plan your day around it, but if you're in the neighborhood, stop by sometime. They're open now, they used to be 7 days a week, now I was just reading on their door, it's Wednesday through Saturday, that's all. And inside is a painting that was done by Gene Blackburn of what Rogers Settlement might have looked like along the Meshasik. This river here is now the Meshasik River. This Great Salt Pond is where Waterfire is now.
Yes.
This hill up here is Smith Hill, where the State House is, okay? And then further back here is a place called Nutaconticut Hill. Anybody been there?
Yes,
You have, good. Maybe you live over there.
I do. I used to go sliding down there.
There you go. It's 300 feet tall. It's a mountain in Providence. And I never heard a thing about it. Somebody told me I went over there. I don't remember the walks over there. It's a nice place. And up on the top, there's a place that we think the 4 tribes would come together. The Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Okanogan, and Narragansett would hold council up there. So this is all, by the way, on the website that's on your brochure there. So when you're done with this, go home, get online, and start exploring all these places. There are thousands of pictures and video and you name it, okay? This bridge is the Weybosset Bridge at the bottom of College Hill, College Street in Providence, okay? That's the 8th version of bridges that have been there since Roger Williams, okay? In fact, Roger was a toll taker on the original bridge. You know, he had to make a living. And that's the bridge is there because that was the narrowest place you could cross from West Bay to East Bay without having to swim. You could even drive your cattle across there. So that's now a little deeper, and I don't think you'd be successful at driving cows downtown Providence. But it's important to understand that that's where the city of Providence began. I never understood why Providence is the way it is. You have to go back to the 1700s to understand how the city is laid out. Speaking of laying out land, here's how the land around us changed. Starting in 1645, there was the first sale of well, first of all, the sale of Rehoboth, which is an 8 miles square. So that's 64 square miles, right? That was the first sale from Plymouth, and that was to the group from Weymouth who came down. And the second purchase was Wannamoisett, just a little piece of land that John Brown and a couple other people purchased. And then 1653, Sowams was the first Sowams purchase, and then eventually all of Swansea, all of that land was sold. And then that land got split up between Swansea and Barrington. That's why Barrington, you know, they have 2 dates. They have 1717. Well, that's the 1717 part of Barrington. Then it went back, Barrington became Warren. Okay, I mean, there was all kinds of stuff going on. Okay, and then eventually Barrington, Warren, and Swansea became their own towns. So it's a little hard to follow, but you can understand that, first of all, they had surveyors, but there weren't many people here to begin with, and land sales had a lot more to do with economics than anything else. I guess pretty much the way they do today. Here's the church in Rehoboth. This is the present-day church. Anybody recognize that?
The white church.
Well, it's not the white church in Barrington. This is the Newman Church in East Providence in Rumford. Okay, and it's on Newman Avenue, Newman and Pawtucket Avenue, and across the street from it is this huge, one of the oldest cemeteries around. there's a burial there from 1653, William Carpenter. Okay. I don't know if anybody knew that they filmed some of Hocus Pocus 2 right around here, and that's the graveyard they used. It's a spooky one, that's for sure. But that church was first gathered in 1643. This is the fourth building they've had. But that was the first English settlement, all of which was burned during the King Philip War, so there are no original buildings there. Not far from there is Hunt's Mills. Anybody been there? It's kind of off the road.
I'm a docent, and they're open Sunday. They're opening Sunday for the
Thank
season
you.
from 1 to 3:30.
Right, that's one Sunday a month they have open house
The
there.
second Sunday of the month.
Second Sunday. So if you want to go over there, the bridge is fixed now, so
Bridge is
it's
fixed, yeah.
easier to get there. And you will see the 10-mile river, which pretty much looks like that right now, okay? It's an amazing river, and
It is.
Native people used to fish there. And then, of course, the English people said, well, that's where we're going to put our mills. And in 1643, they started building mills there. So, you know, the beat goes on, you know. Let's take over this nice pristine land and turn it into industrial stuff, you know. In any case,
Where is that?
at Hunts Mills.
114A.
In East Providence. Pardon me?
Right, it's 114A, right across from Turner Reservoir
Yep.
entrance.
Right. It's like, if you Google Hunts Mills, it'll take you right there. And, I've got maps for everything on the website as well.